Brisk It 580 Smart Pellet Grill review. You heard me, the pit is named Brisk It, and this pit even has a brain. So grab a beer rod, but none of that crap in a blue can. We're gonna amplify some backyard barbecue fun. The Brisk It, it comes in 2 boxes. It is organized and packed pretty dang good. There's basically only 5 steps to assemble this pit. It took my boys less than an hour to put this pit together. The hardest part, and it was kind of tricky, was to attach the legs to the chamber. The boys suggested they add some pre-tapped nuts because it is kind of hard to get the washers and the nuts on in that tight of a corner. But they were happy to see that Brisk It sends the tools that you need to assemble this pit. We did run into a couple issues during the assembly. The first thing that we noticed is that the fire pot wasn't bolted down, but that's a simple fix. Just run to the hardware store and pick up some number 8 self-tapping screws and bolt it up tight. And the other issue, for some reason, the knob on the easy clean out exploded in the box. To fix that issue was pretty simple. I just contacted customer service and they sent me a new knob within a couple days. The initial startup and the burn off was a breeze on the 580. I love that they have an automatic prime feature in this controller. All you do is set it over to prime auger and it'll run for 5 minutes and you'll start hearing some plinks and plunks of the pellets falling into the fire pot. Then it stops and then you can start it back up and do your initial burn off. Like most of the burn-offs that I do, I typically like to run it at a lower temperature before I go to the max. So I set the temp at 300 degrees and once it's reached that temp, I set a timer for 30 minutes. After that, I just went another 30 minutes at 400 degrees. Seeing that I had a nice and hot pit, I went right straight into cooking. My first cook was just some standard barbecue chicken. During the burn-off and this first cook, I noticed right away that the 580, it smokes pretty dang good. And that chicken had a perfect barbecue color with some really good smoky flavor. The build quality on the Brisk It, it's pretty good. The pit itself is made out of rolled and stainless steel and painted with a matte powder coated finish. The Brisk It is about 47 inches wide, 46 inches tall, and about 26 inches deep. Plus the 580, it weighs 135 pounds. The Brisk It, it has 580 square inches of cooking space, 428 on the bottom rack, and 152 on the small warming rack. And both grates are made out of porcelain coated steel. We have a 22-pound hopper on the 580, so you can do an overnight cook on this pit, but you're probably going to want to check after about 6 hours just to make sure that you don't have any pellets piling up inside that hop. One thing that I want to point out is that you do not have a pellet dump on this pit. This PID controller is one of the better ones that I've ran in a long time. And the full color LCD, it's pretty nice. We have a temperature range of 180 up to 500 degrees with a warming mode of 165, and it can be adjusted in 5-degree increments. Plus the app that they make for this is pretty dang fancy. That's why I named this pit Fancy Controller. It's one of the better looking apps that I've had too. This PID controller also controls the fan throughout the cook. That means it's analyzing multiple data points to give us a precise cooking temp for all different types of grilling. You'll actually hear and see the fan in action. When the fan is blowing, you see a little extra smoke come out of the vent. You have 2 probe ports and they send you 2 probes and they are color coordinated. You can set 2 individual timer alerts and you can also set up alerts for your probes at different temps. We have 1 side shelf with tool hooks, but you can also use the hopper lid if you need more space. We have an ash cleanout system on this pit with a hidden grease and ash drawer. The one pan will catch all the ash from the fire pot and the other one catches the grease and the cooking debris. We have 2 locking casters and 2 wagon wheels. The quality on these, they're okay, but the pit does move around very well. When it comes to cooking, I have to say that this Brisk It 580, it does a fantastic job. On almost every single pit, I always like to cook up some St. Louis ribs. I noticed right away in the first 30 minutes how dark these ribs got from how this pit likes to smoke. They certainly had a good bite off the bone smoky flavor, but I should have wrapped these ribs because I used a very heavy sugar rub and sauce on them. But I'm a stubborn stubborn Norwegian and I prefer a no-wrap rib. And even I sometimes have to put my ego aside and have to improvise throughout the cook. On the third cook, I figured it was a good time to test some temps inside that chamber. I smoked up a pork butt and we did have a difference of about 30 to 50 degrees from left to right inside this pit. But the pork butt, it cooked up normally, and once I reached 180 degrees, we went ahead and panned it up and made it nice and tender. So it really just boils down to what I ended up with, and at the end, we had some really good pulled pork for dinner. For the last test cook, I did up a whole chicken using the automatic cooking app. The first thing that I noticed in this recipe, it wanted me to spritz every minute and baste every 2 minutes. So I just disabled those 2 alerts. Then I just pushed that recipe info over to the controller. Then the brisket automatically set the temperature to 225 degrees and set a timer for that first step. When that timer was all done and finished, it went into step 2. And it ran that whole chicken at 375 degrees for another hour and a half. This step really darkened up that chicken and made that skin nice and crispy. I did rotate this yard bird a few times throughout this cook because I know that the left side is running a little hotter. This helped me achieve the doneness temps that I need on the dark and the white meat. But if I was going to do this cook again, I would lower that doneness temp down to 162 degrees because there's obviously a few degrees of carryover on every single cook. My overall opinion on the automatic cook, it's pretty good, and I think it's perfect for any beginner. The app gave me plenty of warnings and did notify me when it was time to move to the next step. But remember, every single cook is a tad different, so you have to be prepared to improvise and make adjustments on the fly. The cleanup on the brisket, it's like all standard pellet grills. You just gotta scrape up the racks, clean off that drip pan, and then vacuum it all out. Brisk It does sell some liners that you can purchase to make the cleanup on the drip pan a lot easier. Once it's all dirty and mudded up, you can just throw it away and put on a new one. I also like that the controller does give you a warning that it's time to clean out that fire pot. And you can see there is a little bit of ash buildup in it after a few cooks. And as long as you have that hidden drawer opened up, you might as well clean out that grease pan too. My overall opinion on this pellet grill is very good. Number one, it is great for a beginner because of the automatic recipes. This pit would work great for a young married couple or a small family, or somebody that's looking for a very fancy and up-to-date controller and app. Some of you might be asking, what is the cost on the Birsk It 580? Typically it's $850, but I have seen it go for less. Hands down, the thing that I like the most on this little pit is the controller and the app. It's not only full color, but it also looks pretty cool on the app. I really like how this pit looks, and I'm hoping that they make a bigger model in the future. If there's one thing that I'd like to see them change, it is the wheels. I would like to see them either built heavier duty or 4 rotating locking casters. I would love to see them add a hopper cleanout to this pit. And finally, I'd like to see them make that cleanout drawer a little bigger where you could use 2 standard grease pail liners. These are a lot easier to find at your local box store. Well, that's all I got. Roll the nation.